These are the top moments of judges getting attacked in court.
A deadly shooting inside an Atlanta courthouse. A judge his stenographer murdered.
A Jacksonville man will spend the rest of his life in prison after trying to kill a federal judge.
He had already killed 3 people to my knowledge, and he wasn't going to stop.
This is Brian G. Nichols.
We are asking you to honestly consider imposing a sentence of death.
On the morning of March 11, 2015, at exactly 8:45 a.m., Nichols was being escorted to his retrial for rape and other charges. A sheriff's deputy was with him, and when she took off his handcuffs, Nichols saw his chance. He lunged at her, and they struggled fiercely for about 3 minutes. Finally, Nichols overpowered her, snatched the key, and made his way to a locked box where her gun was stored. Nichols retrieved the gun, changed clothes, and crossed a sky bridge into the next building, heading straight for the courtroom. Once inside, Nichols made his way to Judge Roland Barnes' private chambers. He ripped out the phone lines, took 3 hostages, and demanded to know where the judge was. Nichols left the chambers several times, eventually returning with another deputy as a hostage. Nichols seized the second deputy's gun and entered the courtroom from behind the bench. He fired a single shot into Judge Barnes' head, then turned and shot court reporter Julie Brandow, killing her. Nichols then made his way down the stairwell, exiting through an emergency door and setting off the alarm.
We're just running around and saying, get out of the courthouse, get out of the courthouse.
A deadly shooting inside an Atlanta courthouse. A judge his stenographer murdered.
On Martin Luther King Jr., witnesses reported seeing him fire multiple shots into the abdomen of another sheriff's deputy, Hoyt Teasley.
The suspect is at large right now. He is identified as Brian Nichols.
At about 2:30 a.m., Ashley Smith returned to her apartment in Duluth, about 20 miles northeast of Atlanta, after running an errand. Nichols forced his way in at gunpoint, binding her hands and feet.
I started to scream just at the top of my lungs, and he came up to me, shut up, and just point the gun at me, just shut up, don't scream. If you don't scream, I won't hurt you. So I stopped screaming, and he pushed me in the house and shut the door and locked it. And I just knew that I wasn't gonna make it out of there. I knew I was gonna die. But I immediately said, God, look, he can rape me, he can do whatever he wants to me. Just let me walk out of here alive.
As they talked for hours about religion and family, Nichols began to relax and eventually unbound her. Smith then drove Nichols to hide his truck and brought him back to the apartment in her car. Despite having her cell phone with her, she didn't call the police during the trip. Around 6:30 to 7 a.m., construction workers arrived at David Wilhelm's home, found his body, and alerted the police, who issued an alert for the blue Chevrolet pickup truck. Nichols allowed Smith to leave to visit her daughter, even giving her money and saying he would stay at her apartment for a few days. Around 9:50 a.m., Smith called 911.
I called 911.
Brian Nichols came to my house at 2 o'clock last night.
Emails advising that Brian Nichols is in her apartment and she ran out.
And within minutes, a SWAT team surrounded the building. By 11:24 a.m., Nichols surrendered, waving a white t-shirt or towel, and was taken into custody.
We can confirm that Gwinnett County SWAT team has Brian Nichols in custody.
On March 15, 2005, Nichols made his first court appearance after being captured.
That he is a conniving, vicious, cold-blooded, remorseless, and extremely dangerous person. That is who he was then. That is who he is now. And that is who he will continue to be until he is put to death.
On May 5, 2005, a Fulton County grand jury indicted Nichols on 54 counts, including 4 counts of felony murder. District Attorney Paul Howard announced that the state would seek the death penalty. On May 17, 2005, Nichols pleaded not guilty to all 54 counts. On November 7, 2008, after 12 hours of deliberation, a jury found Nichols guilty on all 54 counts, rejecting the defense attorney's claim that Nichols suffered from mental illness. On December 13, 2008, Superior Court Judge James Botiford sentenced Nichols to life in prison without parole, the maximum for all counts, a day after the jury deadlocked on a death penalty sentence.
I hereby sentence Mr. Nichols to 20 years to serve, consecutive to counts 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, and 32. And I'm going to give him the maximum of a life imprisonment. None of this will be served on probation. I'm not planning on giving Mr. Nichols any probation at all. Neither am I planning on giving him a fine.
While Nichols's reaction could certainly be dismissed as a mental health issue, what happens when you get into a wrestling match with the judge, like in the case of Sidney Newsom? This is Sidney Newsom, who is facing a domestic violence charge in Pike County Justice Court in Mississippi. Southern District Judge Aubrey Rimes was presiding over the hearing. Newsom initially seemed to be in a good mood as he reviewed some papers. But an altercation with a court officer seemed to agitate him. Newsom was then asked to sign some papers. Which the officer presented to Judge Rimes. However, Newsom was not ready to rest his case. He furiously argued with Judge Rimes, who promptly asked the officer to remove him from the court. As he was being led from the courtroom, Newsom lost it. First, he grabbed a stack of papers and threw it at Judge Rimes. The officer tried to subdue him, but Newsom managed to overpower her. He then threw a telephone at the judge. This is when the judge decided to take matters into his own hands. As Newsom threw more paper at him, Judge Rimes single-handedly pinned him to the table. Eventually, backup arrived. Newsom was restrained and taken from the courtroom. He faced additional charges for contempt of court and served 48 hours in prison.
Ridiculous. This shouldn't happen. My first concern was, for the people in that courtroom. And, so that's not supposed to happen. Judge Rimes is no pushover. He's probably got a few years on me, but he was still able to physically grab the guy, pick him off the ground, and put him on the table.
Of course, I know Judge Rimes personally, and he's quite capable of handling himself, but you never want to see anything like that, obviously, happen in your courtroom.
Sidney Newsom's courtroom antics were definitely crazy, but how does it compare to punching the judge, like in the case of Dibra Reden? This is Dibra Reden, who's facing charges for attempted battery in Nevada. 30-year-old Reden was arrested after he allegedly attacked a man with a baseball bat. He pleaded guilty and faced a possible sentence of 1 to 4 years in prison. At his sentencing, Reden had a calm and matter-of-fact exchange with Clark County District Judge Mary Kay Holthus.
Based on my criminal history, I feel that I shouldn't be sent to prison for a second time.
Have you looked at your criminal history? Have you looked at your criminal history?
I've actually just, I looked at it.
You lived it, I suppose.
I just looked at it, yeah.
Yeah.
Judge Holthus then reminded Reden of his criminal history.
3 felonies, a gross, 9 misdemeanors, multiple DVs. Got a lot going on, sir.
Yeah, I just figured
battery on a protected person, robberies, attempt home invasion.
Reden, who struggled with mental health issues like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, tried to convince the judge that he deserved a second chance.
I feel like I shouldn't be sent to prison, but if it's appropriate for you, then you have to do what you have to do. But I figured that, if I'm in a better place in my life, I'm not doing drugs, I'm not out there committing crimes now, and I feel like I should be given a shot because I'm in a better place than I was.
But Judge Holthus was having none of it.
I appreciate that, but I think it's time that he gets a taste of something else because I just can't with that history.
This is when things got crazy. Reden launched over the courtroom bench and headed straight for Judge Holthus. Eventually, deputies were able to restrain him. As alarms went off in the courtroom, people started to call for help.
That's affirmative. Medical is requested. Judge's chambers.
Yeah, be advised. 515's got a big laceration to his head. Judge hit her head into the wall, and I got an inmate that's bleeding up here.
It's going to be a positive transport to UMC for the marshal.
Be advised. I'm also going to need a biohazard cleanup for a lot of blood on the floor.
It was later found that Reden allegedly punched Judge Holthus and pulled out parts of her hair. One marshal had to be hospitalized and needed 25 stitches after suffering a forehead injury as well as a dislocated shoulder. A few days later, Reden was seen in court again, heavily shackled and wearing a spit mask for the sentencing of his initial assault case.
Good morning. All right, this is on for the continuation of Mr. Reden's sentencing. For purposes of the record, I want to make it clear that I am not changing or modifying the sentence I was in the process of imposing last week before I was interrupted by defendant's actions. All right, that being said, in accordance with the laws of the state of Nevada, this court does now sentence you, in addition to the $25 administrative assessment fee, $150 DNA fee, the $3 DNA administrative assessment fee, and $250 indigent defense fee, 19 to 48 months in the Nevada Department of Corrections.
Additionally, he faced 13 new charges for the attack on Judge Holthus, including attempted murder, battery, and extortion by threat. If convicted, Reden could spend decades in prison. Dibra Reden is a prime example of a convict acting crazy in court. However, what happened when a man tried to assassinate the judge? Like in the case of Aaron Marcus Richardson.
A Jacksonville man will spend the rest of his life in prison after trying to kill a federal judge.
This is Aaron Marcus Richardson. His story is filled with hatred from all through. On June 23, 2013, this man, Judge Timothy Corrigan, was the target of an assassination attempt by this guy, Aaron Marcus Richardson. Timothy Corrigan is only alive because the bullet missed his head by just 1.6 inches.
His inexperience and incompetence is why Judge Corrigan is with us today.
You see, Timothy and his wife had just gotten back from a wedding and were unwinding at home. Timothy was relaxing in his favorite chair with his wife sitting about 5 feet away. Out of nowhere, he heard this insanely loud explosion right by his right ear.
When he looked through, he's looking through because the judge is leaning back, and you can imagine the judge's head is here. And he saw, without a doubt, he had in his heart the intent to murder.
His wife immediately hit the floor, shouting at Timothy to join her because there was gunfire. Timothy, still a bit dazed, eventually dropped to the floor and crawled out of the living room. They managed to call the cops, who arrived quickly. But Marcus, the shooter, had already taken off.
When he looked through the scope, he only saw the judge's head, but the muzzle of the weapon matched it.
2 days later, the police caught Marcus, though he tried to mislead them with false statements. Turns out his reason for target practicing with Timothy's head was because of a 2008 case where Corrigan sentenced Richardson for attempting to make a bomb.
An attack not just on him, but on all of us who were parts of the judicial system, and an attack on all of us as Americans.
Richardson cooked up a scheme he called Mission Freedom, which involved forging an order supposedly signed by Judge Corrigan that would dismiss all his pending charges and even return his driver's license and credit. In the end, Richardson was slapped with a laundry list of charges, including attempted murder of a U.S. district judge, discharging a firearm during a violent crime, stealing a gun from a dealer, possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, possession of a stolen firearm, impersonating a police officer, 5 counts of making false statements to an FBI agent, and 9 counts of lying to a probation officer. Richardson was sentenced to 343 years in prison.
Justice has been given in this case, and he will never see the light of day.
He didn't appear to be remorseful. He didn't accept responsibility. He made some claim that the truth will later come out, suggesting that at some point his actions will be vindicated. Of course, they will not be. This was a heinous crime.
While Richardson missed his target, the next judge on our list wasn't as lucky. This is 30-year-old Bass Webb, who's in court on attempted murder charges. CCTV footage outside of Kentucky jail showed Webb, a former inmate who spent 3 months there on assault charges, intentionally hitting 2 prison workers with his car. While one guy managed to dodge it, the other was not so lucky. Webb was arrested and produced in court before Judge Vanessa Dixon. Since she knew the two jail employees beforehand, Judge Dixon decided to recuse herself from the case.
There's no way I'm going to try this case or have any further proceedings, or I'll have to see you for one further second.
But what Webb did next shocked the whole courtroom.
Set preliminary hearings next week.
Webb literally spat on Judge Dixon, clearly taking her by surprise. After initially dismissing him, Judge Dixon brought Webb back, charged him, and threw him out of the courtroom. Nevertheless, this is not the end of Webb's defiance of the law. While awaiting trial, Webb started a riot with other inmates inside the Fayette County Detention Center. Webb was shot with beanbag bullets and even hit in the neck with a pepper ball. In retaliation, Webb swung a metal telephone box at a corrections officer. He was charged again for his actions and sentenced to 15 years in prison.
I will accept the jury's recommendation of 5 years on count 1, enhanced to 15 years pursuant to the persistent felony offender first degree.
Additionally, Webb was convicted of attempting to murder the two jail employees and got an additional 37 years, facing a total of 52 years of prison time. During this time, new evidence came up linking Webb to the unsolved murder of his ex-girlfriend, Bria Runewich. While incarcerated, Webb had bragged to a detective about murdering the 32-year-old. To escape the death penalty, Webb pleaded guilty and got an additional 50 years in prison. Now, if that wasn't enough, 5 years later, another cold case came to haunt Webb. This time, he was charged with the murder of another ex-girlfriend, Sabrina Vaughn.
He's already been convicted of killing one former girlfriend, and next month, Bass Webb is scheduled to stand trial for the murder of a second former girlfriend.
This time, Webb appeared in court with a sinister tattoo on his head. It had a murder hit list of all the people he intended to kill, including all judges, all prosecutors, all cops, the media, 3 rats that had been crossed out, and many more. Webb was convicted and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years.
We have found the defendant guilty of the offense of intentional murder.
While Bass Webb's audacious acts in the courtroom shocked everyone, how does it compare to a woman attacking the judge, like in the case of Melissa Hardwick? This is Melissa Hardwick, who was in Russell and Wayne County Family Court in Kentucky for a domestic violence hearing. Melissa's ex-husband had filed a domestic violence order against her.
Your statements in your petition as part of your testimony, but I need you to tell me briefly, in your own words, what happened to cause you to ask for a domestic violence order.
Yes, Your Honor. Things have been escalating, I guess, since the first of the year. And Melissa's had a couple MIWs and a couple arrests. And she got out of jail in, I guess, April. And she started, we hadn't really had anything personal up until that point. She got out of jail in April.
He was explaining the situation when suddenly Melissa erupted.
My personal life is none of your business. It has nothing to do with
Miss Hardwick,
no.
You will be held in contempt of this court if you become disruptive.
I don't care. I haven't done anything to this court. I haven't done anything to him.
She will be arrested for contempt of court.
It doesn't make any difference.
You will serve 10 days for contempt of court.
She was arrested for contempt and sentenced to 10 days in jail. This is when things got crazy.
Go now.
Melissa leapfrogged towards the judge, but thankfully, court deputies stopped her just in time. However, that did not stop her verbal threats.
Follow me!
Stand back.
Wait and see. Get my boyfriend off the floor.
Melissa faced additional criminal charges for her antics.
A new judge will have to be appointed to represent because she will be charged criminally for the threats that were made in open court today.
Eventually, Melissa was sentenced to 120 days in prison for her outburst.